Welcome to Podcasting for Business Owners. I'm your host, Laura McRae, a podcast consultant, educator, and self-confessed podcast nerd. If you're thinking of launching a podcast or want to grow the one you have, you're in the right place. Hold on to your headphones and let's go. Hello and welcome back to Podcasting for Business Owners, the podcast that helps you share your story, lead your industry, and grow your network through podcasting. I'm your host, Laura McRae, and if you're stuck on what to name your podcast, or you've already chosen something but you're not 100% sure, or if you're thinking of rebranding your current podcast, this episode is for you. I'm walking you through what actually matters when it comes to naming your podcast, the mistakes I see far too often, and a few simple tips to help you make a confident decision and move forward. Let's make this part easy so you can focus on the fun stuff like creating great content. First things first. Yes, your podcast name matters, but not in a way you might think. A lot of new podcasters get stuck here because they feel like it has to be clever, unique, or just right before they move forward. But in reality, a great podcast name is clear and searchable. That's what really matters. Think of it like naming a book, but with a twist. The goal isn't to be mysterious, it's to help your ideal listener instantly know it's for them. One of the most helpful things you can do is use keywords in your podcast title. Think about what your audience is typing into the search bar and include that. I know Amy Porterfield's done a rebrand now, but before her rebrand, her podcast title was called Online Marketing Made Easy. And this is a great example of a podcast name. You know exactly what you're getting. She didn't try to be overly clever, she was strategic. If you've already got a business brand, you can absolutely bring that into your podcast title too. For example, one of my old clients, Belvediglione, she's a photographer. And she has a membership group for other photographers called Camera Queens. And she used this same name for a podcast. Her full podcast title is Camera Queens Find Your Focus. So she used both Camera Queens, which is the name of her membership group, and she's used Find Your Focus, which relates to both photography and for her members who want to find their focus in the photography industry. It connects her offers, helps people remember her, and she stands out, all while using searchable keywords like camera. Just a quick note, if you're not just naming your podcast but actually launching it, and you want support without having to figure it all out on your own, I've got something for you. It's called the Podcast Launch Program. It takes you through the exact step-by-step process I use with my one-to-one clients to launch a professional strategic podcast, but in a self-paced version so you can do it yourself. Naming your podcast is just one piece, and this program covers everything from planning, recording, editing, uploading, launching, and even promoting. If you're ready to stop overthinking and start taking real action, this might be exactly what you need. I'll pop the link in the show notes. All right, let's get back to it. Let's talk about a few common mistakes I see when people are naming their show. Trying to be too clever or cryptic. You don't want your audience guessing what your podcast is about. A name like Behind the Mic might sound catchy, but what does it actually mean? Is it about podcasting, music, or interviews? If your listener has to stop and think, there's a good chance they'll scroll right past it. Instead, aim for clarity. Something like, Build Your Business with Confidence, or Wellness for Working Mums, gives your audience an instant context. They know exactly what it's for and what kind of content they can expect. Another common mistake is using words that are often misspelt. This one catches more people out than you might think. Some words are just awkward to spell, even for us adults, with spell check at our fingertips. Words like entrepreneur, accommodation, and consciousness are commonly misspelt. And that matters when people are trying to find your podcast in a search bar. I'll be honest, I didn't include the word entrepreneur in the title of my own podcast, even though it would have made sense, because I can't spell it confidently myself without checking it first. If I'm second-guessing it, I know potential listeners probably will too. So if you're thinking about naming your podcast something like The Conscious Entrepreneur Collective, just keep in mind that tricky or uncommon spellings might make your show harder to find. Even if it sounds great out loud, always ask yourself, can someone easily search for this without getting the spelling wrong? Is there a simpler word I can use that still gets my message across? Making it easy to find should always come before trying to sound impressive. Another thing I see so common is people using unnecessary filler words in their podcast title. The two I'm going to talk about now are the words podcast and the word the. Don't put the word podcast in your podcast title. We know you're a podcast because we've found you on the podcast app, so there's no point in using the word podcast. It's just a waste of keywords. And the word the, it doesn't mean anything. It's a waste of space. So instead of saying, for example, the Mindset Podcast, think about how you can be more specific and use more keywords. So instead, you might want to call your podcast Mindset for New Coaches. This tells us more about who it's for and what it's about, and it uses every word wisely. Remember, podcast apps often cut off longer titles too. So make every word count and stop using unnecessary filler words. Now, once you've got a name you love, make sure it doesn't already exist. I recommend using a website called podnews.net for this. It's one of the best tools for checking across multiple podcast platforms at once. Don't just check in Apple or Spotify, because not every single podcast is in just Apple, and not every single podcast is in Spotify. By going to podnews.net, you're making sure you're covering so many more podcast platforms, all at one time. So in the top right corner of podnews.net, there's a little search bar. Go in there and type in the name that you've chosen for your podcast. So for example, let's say I'm a brand photographer and I've come up with two possible podcast names: Picture Perfect Branding and Become a Brand Photographer. When I search Picture Perfect Branding on Pod News, nothing comes up, which is great. That means that name is available and no one else has taken it. But if I type in Become a Brand Photographer, it's already taken. So I'd avoid using that one to prevent confusion. So I wouldn't choose to use that podcast name. I would recommend always coming up with a brand new title rather than using one that already exists, because you don't want to get your podcast confused with somebody else's. Even if the podcast isn't active anymore, it's better to pick something unique that's clearly yours. Now here's your final check. Once you've got a name for your podcast, say it out loud, a lot. You're going to be saying this in every single podcast episode, in guest interviews and in your marketing. So make sure it rolls off the tongue. If it doesn't feel right, then tweak it. Your podcast name should feel like something you're proud to say. Now let's recap. Keep your podcast title short and clear. Use keywords that your ideal listeners would actually search for. Avoid confusing or commonly misspelt words. Don't waste space with filler words like the or podcast. Check your name across platforms using podnews.net. And make sure it feels good when you say it out loud. And don't forget, if you need help launching your podcast, from naming it all the way to hitting publish, check out my podcast launch program. It's everything I do with one-to-one clients, packaged up so you can work through it at your own pace. If you've been stuck on your podcast name or want a quick second opinion, DM me on Instagram at podcast.support.services. I love this part and I'm happy to help you narrow it down. And if this episode helped you, please follow the show, leave a quick review or send it to a friend who's planning a podcast too. Thanks for listening and speak to you again next week. If you found value in this podcast, please leave a 5-star rating, and a review would be even better. Your support shows that this is a good show, which will attract high-profile guests and in turn deliver greater value to you. This podcast is produced and edited by me. Don't waste your time on editing. Let me help you with your podcast. Check out the links in the show notes to get in touch.